Good morning, everyone. We will get started with the workshop in 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you for joining and stay tuned. I see our attendee list is growing. For those who just joined, thank you, welcome. We will kick off the workshop in about 1 minute. All right, it's 9:02, so let's get started. It seems like our attendee list has stabilized a bit. Welcome, good morning. Thank you for joining us at the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety's public workshop to learn more about the 2025 Wildfire Mitigation Plan updates for the Group 2 electrical corporations. I'm Nicole Dunlap, Program and Project Supervisor in the Electrical Safety Policy Division, and I will get us started with a few housekeeping items before turning over to the objectives and structure for the day. As a reminder, this public workshop is being recorded and it will be posted online. Energy Safety will post slides from today's presentation to the 2023 to 2025 WMP's docket. Recordings will also be made available on our website. The public process is very important to energy safety, so after the workshop, we welcome any feedback you may have on the workshop, including its structure, topics, and timing. You can email Dakota Smith at dakota.smith@energysafety.ca.gov with feedback or suggestions. Apologies if you can hear some background noise on my end. So next slide, and we'll open with a brief safety message. As this is a virtual meeting and everybody is participating remotely, please be aware of your surroundings and know the evacuation route out from your location. If you're alone in your space, please make sure someone is aware of your location in the event of an emergency. If you feel something unusual or have any safety concerns, please use the chat, raise your hand, and let us know if need be. This workshop is an all-day event and requires us to sit in front of a computer. Please be mindful to stand up and move around throughout the day and use the planned breaks as opportunities to step away from the screen. Finally, keep emergency contact information readily available in case of an emergency. Next slide. So we'll start with some background about the Wildfire Mitigation Plans, or WMPs. Electrical corporations are required to prepare and submit wildfire mitigation plans to Energy Safety that describe how the electrical corporation is constructing, maintaining, and operating its electrical lines and equipment in a manner that will minimize the risk of catastrophic wildfires. Electrical corporations submit a base WMP every 3 years. In the interim years, electrical corporations submit updates to the 3-year WMP. Electrical corporations submitted 2023 to 2025 base WMPs in the spring of 2023. At that time, Energy Safety evaluated and approved electrical corporations' plans for 2023 and 2024. In 2024, electrical corporations submitted updates to its plans for 2025, referred to as the 2025 WMP update. Group 1 electrical corporations, including PG&E, SDG&E, Southern California Edison, and Bear Valley submitted their 2025 WMP updates in March of 2024. The Group 2 electrical corporations, PacifiCorp, Liberty, Transbay Cable, Horizon West, and LS Power, submitted 2025 WMP updates in July of 2024. This workshop focuses only on the Group 2 2025 WMP updates. Energy Safety's WMP update guidelines outline requirements for electrical corporations' 2025 WMP updates. In the guidelines, Energy Safety defined 5 categories of updates that electrical corporations may include in their WMP updates, referred to as reportable updates. These include 1, updates to risk models, 2, changes to approved targets, objectives, and expenditures, 3, quarterly inspection targets for 2025 for vegetation management and asset inspections only, 4, new or discontinued programs, and 5, progress on areas for continued improvement. This workshop provides the public and stakeholders an opportunity to hear from Group 2 electrical corporations about their reportable updates in the 2025 WMP updates, and provides a forum for the public and stakeholder questions. Information shared and responses to questions today can help the public and stakeholders prepare and submit informed written comments on the 2025 WMP updates. Written comments are due to Energy Safety on August 12th, 2024, and we'll close out the workshop today with more information on next steps and how you can provide written comments. Again, this workshop is only for Group 2 electrical corporations. The workshop on Group 1 took place in April. So for the agenda, there'll be 4 segments for each of the Group 2 electrical corporations. Each segment will include presentations from the electrical corporation that highlights reportable updates of its WMP. There will then be questions and answers focused on each presentation after it ends. There'll be 2 15-minute breaks and a 1-hour lunch period. And a 1-hour period will be held after all of the presentations for open questions and answers when questions may be asked about any electrical corporation's WMP update or any topic. Moving on to logistics for the day, we really look forward to hearing everybody's comments and questions during the Q&A segments. To ensure we have an orderly discussion, we set forth the following best practices. You can ask written questions in the Zoom chat at any time. Please raise your hand during the Q&A sessions to verbally ask a question during those periods. Ask questions specific to each electrical corporation's presentations during the Q&A session following that presentation. Ask questions applicable to all electrical corporations during the Q&A at the end of the day. And with that, I will pass over to Johan Im, who will continue facilitation for the remainder of the workshop, and we will kick off hearing from electrical corporations, starting with Transbay Cable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thank you for the introduction. And now that was for the introduction, and now we'll turn it over to the Transbay Cable if you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Johan. Next slide, please. My name is Lanil Gardner. I represent Transbay Cable. Transbay Cable is a high voltage DC system. It's comprised of 2 AC to DC converter stations with submarine cable. The facilities are located in Pittsburgh, California, and the Potrero converter station is located in the city of San Francisco. Transbay Cable provides up to 40% of San Francisco's electric power with a rating of 400 megawatts. It's a resiliency project that provides an alternative path for power to come into the city of San Francisco. The company or the facility has no distribution, no loads, no generation, and no retail customers. It's a solely transmission-only facility. TBC has been in operation for approximately 13 years and has no history of utility instigated ignitions, and we have 17 employees. Next slide, please. On this slide, we're showing TBC's operating territory. As you can see to the far right, there's the location of the Pittsburgh substation. The blue line traversing the San Francisco Bay waters represents the submarine cable, and ending in the bottom left-hand corner with our Potrero converter station in the city of San Francisco. Next slide. Here we've got a close-up of the San Francisco converter station. The submarine cable comes in on the image in the right, towards the right there, underground for approximately a half mile or so into our converter station. All of TBC's above ground utility infrastructure is within the converter station walls. The walls are 12-foot high concrete walls. We take in the DC power, convert it from DC to AC, step it down to 115 kV, and send it again underground across the street to the Pacific Gas and Electric substation that's across the street. Next slide, please. The slide here shows a close-up of TBC's Pittsburgh converter station. I neglected to mention, but as the San Francisco facility is located in a wholly urban area, it's not considered for wildfire risk due to the limited existence of vegetation in and around the San Francisco converter station. As you can see here, the Pittsburgh converter station, it is proximate to some vegetative fields, mostly scrub grass and other low-level grasslands. The converter station in Pittsburgh is similarly set up to the San Francisco substation with underground cables coming in 200 kV and all the above ground utility infrastructure enclosed within the converter station, again within the 12-foot concrete walls. There is also an underground AC cable that connects to the neighboring Pacific Gas and Electric substation in Pittsburgh. Next slide, please. This slide represents the locations of TBC's converter stations and infrastructure in comparison with the high fire threat districts. Both the San Francisco and the Pittsburgh substations are wholly outside of Tier 1 or Tier 3 high fire threat districts. Next slide. For TBC's 2025 WNP update, TBC had no reportable updates for the first four identified categories. TBC reported that it had no plans for improvements during the 2024 and 2025 year in its base 2023 to 2025 WNP plan. So our no reports is reflective of the statements that we made when we submitted the base plan in 2023. Next slide, please. TBC was required to provide information to Energy Safety on one area of progress improvements, specifically reporting on our QA and QC process. In the 2025 WNP update, TBC provided the required documentations, including procedures and checklists for QA/QC process. Additionally, also provided descriptions and analysis for the QA/QC process relating to asset inspections and management. In TBC's 2023 to 2025 WNP, and also in previous years WNPs, TBC has noted that because its facilities include a submarine cable and are hardscaped and the only above ground infrastructure is within TBC's converter station walls, TBC is not required to have a vegetation management project. Vegetation Management Program, excuse me. Progress item 2 was for TBC to comment and document on its sharing of best practices. This progress item was not due for reporting until the provision of the 2026 through 2028 WMP submission, which will be due next year. As a result, there was no reporting for the 2025 WMP update. And with that, that concludes TBC's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Now we'll open it for the questions for Transpacific Cable.
Looks like we have a raised hand.
Hi, this is Kevin Miller. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation. This is Kevin Miller with the TPUC Safety Policy Division. A question on the thanks for the update on the QA/QC program. Just wondering if Transbay Cable's QA/QC program includes quality controls like sample size, verification methods, pass rate targets, and that kind of information and its improvement plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Miller. So TBC's facility is very limited, so we conduct asset inspections on the 2 sites on a weekly basis, and each weekly report is checked and reviewed by a supervisor. Again, it's a small team of basically 6 individuals who perform the asset inspections on a regular basis. So it's a very small and limited program given the size and scope of our operations.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
I am not seeing any more public comments at this time.
All right. Just as a reminder, if there was a question that you asked or you would want more information on, or if you'd like a follow-up, we'll also have a open Q&A session at the end where you can use the time for that. Before we move on, I'll open it up for just one last time for any questions or raise hand. All right, looks like we're good then. Thank you, Lino. Now we have a bit of an option. After Transbay Cable's presentation and Q&A, we are scheduled for a break, but since we still have about half an hour until the break, so we can either take a break now or we can move on to the Pacific Court if they're ready. But if not, no pressure, we can wait until the scheduled time. So how do you think about that, Pacific Court?
Yeah, good morning. We are ready to start.
Okay, then let's do it then. Thank you.
We go. Well, good morning. My name is Melissa Swenson. I'm the Director of Wildfire Mitigation Program Delivery for Pacific Power. And I'll be walking through the presentation today and happy to take questions for myself. And also with me is Chase Talbot, who's our Asset Reliability Manager. So next slide, please. So today we'll be summarizing our 2025 updates, going into some details on updates to our risk models, which is the majority of the changes in our WMP, as well as walk through changes to our approved targets, expenditures, and objectives, our inspection targets, summarize some of our new and discontinued programs, and also walk through our areas of continued improvement. So next slide, please. And here you can see just a high-level summary of our changes that we made on the risk models. We implemented an ignition risk model in 2023 that's providing modeling of ignition risk across assets in our service territory. We have increased some of our initiative activities, so we wanted to highlight that there in our targets, objectives, and expenditures, and also updated our inspection targets for that. And we have a few programs that we have that are one new program and a few discontinued programs, as well as a couple of programs that are deferred. And then we have several areas of continued improvement that we're happy to walk through. And then there are two that at Energy Safety's direction, we will be providing an update for in the 2026 filing. So next slide, please. So as I said from the previous slide, we made significant number of changes in our risk modeling. So in the 2023 filing, we shared that we were going to be implementing TechnoSilva's, what is now known as the fire site risk model, to support ignition risk modeling for a long-term risk. And so in 2023, we did that implementation to help identify and calculate risk scores, ignition risk scores across for overhead assets in our service territory. And as we walk through this, you'll see that we've also used that risk score calculation to enable us to begin to identify where our top contributing segments are for ignition risk, and also identify a high fire risk area in addition to the high fire threat areas that are districts that have been identified by California. So next slide, please. So the figure you see here on screen is from page 78 of the WMP red lines and shows the high-level inputs and outputs to our fire site model. And on the left side is what is known as RAIL, the risk associated with the ignition location. And this is generally discussing and addressing the likelihood of ignition. So you see inputs, general inputs there around our asset types, asset history, including outages and ignition events, as well as weather history. And those help identify where the probability of failure is and also the likelihood of an ignition. And on the right are what we call RAVE, the risk associated with the value exposure. And these are the inputs as well as the outputs that address the consequences should an ignition happen at a location. And over there, you see inputs around things like demographics, the built environment, the terrain, as well as weather, because we know that weather has an impact on both could something ignite as well as what the consequences are if say if the wind pushes a fire. And the outputs on this side are again related to consequence. So how will the fire behave? How fast could it grow? How fast could it move given the terrain, and what could happen to the buildings and built environment there, as well as other community impacts such as what is the impact to vulnerable customers should there be an ignition? How many are in the area? What sort of risk does that have? And what sort of impact could that have on the consequence? So those two components, the RAIL and the RAVE, are put together to create what we call composite risk, which is also the ignition risk calculation. And that gives us our overall ignition risk for assets and locations along the overhead assets. As we note in the figure, last year we started with an 8-hour simulation for our risk calculation for ignition risk. This year we are looking at 8-hour and 24-hour results to compare the results to see if there is a difference, significant difference that would cause us to shift to using a 24-hour ignition risk model for identifying our areas of risk. And we know that's of interest. We've had that discussion in the risk modeling working group that we want to take a look at that. So next slide, please. So there are multiple outputs from this fire site model. And what we've done is we have taken and selected attributes from the model to compute two specific ignition risk numbers. We want to take it into consideration the uniqueness of our service territory. We have a service territory that covers both steep mountainous terrain with lots of fuels, and we also have flatter service territory that is flat and may have more grass and may have more wind-driven events. So what we've done for our assets is calculated a wind-driven ignition risk and a field terrain-driven ignition risk separately. And then, so you can see there in the figure that is figure 6-11 in our WMP, you can see on the left side are the rail attributes, and on the right side are the rave attributes. And then the top set is the field terrain attributes that we've chosen from the rail side. So you can see the attributes we've chosen, the percentile, the weightings, and then on the rave side for field terrain, the attributes we've chosen, there are no percentiles on this side, and then the weightings. And then the second set down below, the wind, what attributes we've chosen, and percentiles of weight and weightings for rail and rave. And so we chose to do that separately just because we know sometimes that if you start to roll up that score, you may lose some of the nuances and understanding of a risk as you start to you may lose some of the nuances of what the driver of a risk is. But we do recognize, and we'll talk about this in a couple slides in more detail, that we do need one ignition risk score that we call the combined composite risk score, which is the sum of our wind-driven composite risk and our terrain-driven composite risk for the circuit divided by the largest composite circuit score for all the circuits in an area. So we still get to a combined composite risk score, which we use to understand where our highest risk circuits are for the top 5%. But when we are talking about where we're trying to mitigate, we're really using those individual field terrain and wind-driven risk scores. So next slide, please. So one of the things we have done with, now that we have these fire site risk scores, is to establish a high fire risk area in our service territory. And you see that in purple on the slide. This supplements the high fire threat districts that have been established by CAL FIRE and by the state of California. And this helps us identify where those additional risk areas are. And this is a place where we apply the individual field terrain or wind-driven risk scores to help identify those areas that should be in those high fire risk areas. So this is a place where we wanted to make sure we're using those individual risk scores for those circuits as an or. Were you field terrain driven risk threshold or wind driven risk threshold to be in there? And so now we have those additional areas identified. We have not made any changes or made any recommended changes to the high fire threat districts at this time. Next slide, please. So as I said, we are using that combined composite risk score to help understand where our top % contribution to overall risk is. So what circuits are the top 5% risk across our service territory? And so those are listed there in order from 1 to 14. And all of those circuits are either in an HFTD or in our new HFRA. So that was a nice validation that we've identified the right areas for the HFRA. And we've also got an HFTD that we already understand that those circuits are in. And so the other thing we've been doing as we start to have now this risk data is start to be able to apply this risk data for looking at our grid hardening efforts going forward. So before we had, is the circuit in the HFTD? because we know those areas are high risk and identified that they're high risk. Now we have some more granular information about, okay, well, which circuits are high risk, and use particularly the field terrain risk, and look at the max risk score on a circuit to go, how, those are the ones we should be going forward, looking at prioritizing, looking at mitigation efforts for. So as we start to go into have more of this risk information and really apply it, we are starting to actively use it to look at those future mitigations on the grid hardening side and plan using those risk scores as one consideration into the mitigation efforts. And next slide, please. And now we'll do a little bit of a shift away from the risk model to changes in our approved targets and just touch on these a little bit. I think a couple things I want to note is on initiative GH01, the cover conductor installation. We have onboarded a contractor to handle the resourcing and installation of cover conductor in our service territory. And as a result of that, we've also upped the number of miles that we expect to complete. But also that increase in number of miles has an impact on GH02 and GH03, which are distribution pole replacements and transmission pole replacements. Because as we increase the miles of cover conductor that are installed, we'll also be replacing or reinforcing those poles as we go. So that's a driver of the increase there. So, excuse me. We also want to note that we have added on active fire de-energization a new policy around emergency de-energizations, around if fires are encroaching on our assets. So we've implemented that policy and criteria to understand what is happening if maybe there's a fire in the vicinity, try to understand what it may be doing and proactively de-energize equipment for safety measures, both for customers and for the responders who are out there. Next slide, please. And also we have seen some changes in some of our objectives. So a couple of them, RA01, the risk and risk component around PSPS risk assessment solution, and then the quantification of utility risk. So these run as part of the work we did around the fireside implementation. So the fireside implementation gave us our ignition risk. The next piece we are working on is the PSPS risk, and we have shifted that workout. We expect to complete that risk, that first version of the risk model this year. But we expect to have that risk model to help us understand where the public safety power shutoff risk is on a long-term basis, so we can start understanding where we need to go, potentially do mitigation efforts for PSPS events. Along with that, once we have those, then we can start looking at what's our overall wildfire risk between PSPS and ignition risk and start to quantify those. So those two run together. So we want to sequence it: ignition risk, PSPS risk, and then looking at the combined risk of both of those elements. And then on the vegetation management ones, we discussed this, I think, a little bit with Cal Advocates yesterday. We deferred these, and when we originally had these in the plan, we were going to do this work around our legacy work management database and work management tool for vegetation management. Since that time, we've been working with GeoDigital to develop and implement a new vegetation management work system. So we've put on hold the work around process and procedures for database review and audits until that is implemented in early 2025. And then we will pick up this work around the audits and the process and procedures. Next slide, please. And then any changes to approved targets. So I think the one I will highlight is certainly the line rebuild, because we've moved to a contractor. We have increased the cost there, that their costs are more than what internal labor costs would be. Next slide. And then We've also updated our quarterly inspection targets. Our risk impact is still to be determined. As we've been working through what the risk is on our assets and how to quantify the risk, we also recognize that we also, now that we know the risk, also need to be able to work on how do you estimate the effectiveness of the mitigations that you're doing, whether they be grid hardening or the longer term inspection work. So we're really appreciative of the work that's been done in the joint IOU cover conductor workshop to help lend us insights and learnings for other utilities have been doing around this. But also we are now having to work through like, okay, what does that mean for us and how do we start to quantify those activities? Next slide. And then on discontinued programs, we have a couple of them we discontinued. RA04 was to create a new fire ignition tracking database for ignition events near our equipment. We've implemented that database, delivered training to the field crews. So we will complete that. We consider that complete. We will continue to train the field crews on reporting incidents and the data needed as part of the preseason wildfire training that will happen. And then the SA03 is discontinued as the technology it's not in a place where it can be implemented and this was part of Homeland Security Smart City Internet of Things. So we're going to remove the one sensor that's out there. And then we do have a new initiative around the feasibility study around microgrids. So we're studying if those are possible and where those might have optimal areas in our service territory to be utilized. Next slide, please. And then I'll just touch on our areas of continued improvement. We had 18 reflected in our WMP this time. A few of them on here that you see on this slide are about collaboration between utilities and being involved in workshops. So as I mentioned, we've been involved in the risk modeling working group and the joint IOU cover conductor work streams and have found those to be really valuable. And we expect that to continue with the work stream that I know we received information, I think, from Southern Cal Edison. That work stream is picking up again on cover conductor and undergrounding. So we'll continue to participate in that as well as the risk modeling working groups. And as we learn more about dates and timelines around energy safety workshops and climate change and risk modeling and community vulnerability, we will participate in those workshops as well as vegetation management workshops. So just wanted to touch on a few of those in there. And then next slide. And just a few updates here. Want to note on 2309, we will, starting in 2025, align our QA/QC pass rate from the current 80% pass rate to 95%. So we will up that. And then also on 2312, we are now starting in 2025, we'll be separating out and tracking our level 1 conditions from our priority A conditions. And next slide. I think some of these have already been covered. We are continuing to improve our management of conditions and make the transition to, particularly in 2314, have all our assets in one system. So that will be, as we do the Maximo integration and implementation, we'll have our assets in a centralized place. So just wanted to touch on that briefly. And then we've also updated in our WMP the lessons learned. And we'll continue to update that and continue to look at where we can improve and take those lessons learned and implement them into, so we continue to improve on responses to events, whether they be PS or ignitions or received risk from fires. And then we will be filing a non-substantial errata submission here in a little bit with just a few small updates. So. And I think that is the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Melissa. Now we'll open up for questions for Pacific Court. And it seems that there's some questions under the Q&A box.
It looks like there are 3 questions in the Q&A. happy to go ahead and read those out. All three are from Adam Barsh. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. The first question is about the discontinued smart smoke sensor program. The question is there an alternate program to replace this discontinued program?
Not at this time.
And then the second question, Pacificor reported that it completed 101 miles of its targeted covered conductor rebuild project, or 67% of its goal, and also reported that it has experienced some constraints, including permitting. So the question is, how early in the process is Pacificor requesting this permitting?
Permitting happens early in the process as soon as we start to understand what permits are needed. But we also recognize that permitting sometimes takes time, particularly if you have multiple agencies involved in permitting. We are really appreciative of the monthly meetings we have with energy safety, where we talk about some of the constraints that we're having and suggestions they have to help remove some of those permitting barriers.
Thanks, Melissa. And then final question from Adam, related to another constraint mentioned, was regarding ordering materials, which Pacificor indicated that it would do when feasible. And the question is, how is feasible defined here?
So I don't have an answer for you, but I'm happy to circle back if that's possible and give you an answer.
I believe, do you
Is
have
that
a message
possible?
following up? Johan, do you have anything to add on that? Following up on questions after the workshop?
After the workshop, as in during the open Q&A session, or after everything's over?
I just want to make sure I get Adam's question answered about what feasible is.
I see. In that case, we can have a circle back to Adam through either let me actually relate it to Dakota if he's available.
Johan, if we just jot some notes down and we can send out some takeaways on follow-up questions that the electrical corporation should get back to the team on.
Yeah, happy to give him an answer. I just want to make sure I give him the correct answer.
Got it. Yep. Thank you, Nicole. And it seems we still have a few more questions under Q&A.
Yes, we have a question from Kevin Miller. Pacificor states that it has identified access, material, permitting, and resource constraints as the root causes of asset repairs, imminent threat condition, code conditions that are not remediated within the required time frame, and also indicates that the delays of material are due to special order items not being kept in inventory, but states that this accounts for a smaller number of cases. So if not due to lack of materials and inventory, what accounts for most of the delays that Pacificor is experiencing?
I mean, I'm rereading the question just to make sure I understand it. Thank you. So again, Kevin, I'm happy to circle back with you and an answer on that one to make sure we're getting you the correct answer. And we can reach out to our team right now and see if we can get an answer by the open session this afternoon.
We'll jot that one down as well, just in case. And then I believe the question from Zoe is about whether we can share all the questions with attendees. The workshop itself is being recorded, so that will be available at some point after the workshop concludes. So in terms of any live questions that were asked, we'll be able to review those via the workshop recording, and then perhaps any questions that were asked via the chat, we could jot those down. Nicole, I don't know if you want to provide any clarification on that. I want to make sure I'm giving the correct information there.
We'll find a way to make all of the follow-up questions available to the public, whether that's posted to our docket or sent in an email to all of the attendees today. But any follow-up questions will be responded to. The responses will be available to the public.
Nicole. And then it looks like question from Henry Sweat from CPUC. There was a slide showing composite consequence. Looks like it may not have shown probability of ignition in being considered. So the question is, how is probability of ignition being accounted for?
Yeah, so if we go back to, I think it's slide 5 in our presentation with the figure. Oh, a couple more. So we're one right there. One back, please. There we go. So on the left side, you can see the probability of ignition there as part of the risk associated with the ignition location. And that is about really what is the probability that equipment will fail given certain conditions in the history of the equipment. I hope, Henry, does that answer your question?
No, Henry, if you're able to come off mute, but feel free to jump in if you have any follow-up questions to that. But we'll move on to the next question from Zoe Harold. Can you provide a summary of the new HFRA, how its risk scores rank relative to risk scores in the HFTD Tier 3 and Tier 2, and whether the risk in these locations is characterized by wind for fuel-driven fires?
Sure. And maybe we can go to the slide. So we can't necessarily do a one-for-one comparison with the risk scores that are in the HFTD Tier 2 and Tier 3. That was done by a third party with a different methodology. I can say that our risk scores for being included in our HFRA in that purple area, our risk scores are on a scale of 0 to 1. And anything that had a wind-driven or a fuel terrain driven risk score of 0.85 or higher was considered for inclusion and included in the HFRA. So I think, Zoe, we said, are you wind driven or could you be a fuel driven risk? So we looked at the risk scores for either of those on those circuits for inclusion. So. And I think your next question on ETA, we will have that included in the 2026 next year's WMP filing.
Thank you for that. And it looks like we do have a follow-up from Henry in the chat. I think it was related to this slide, I believe, Henry. He's asking, this is just for consequence?
No, because the left side is about the actual likelihood of ignition. So if you assume that the asset will fail, what are the things we want to understand about the attributes of what could happen if it fails?
Henry, let us know if that answers your question. I think further down in the Q&A, he was just added that he wasn't able to see probability on that slide 30 there. And then we have another question from Kevin Miller. This is with regard to the area for continued improvement, PC 2312. Pacificor reports it has made changes to their code that captures imminent threat, asset repair tag conditions at the time of identification. So the question is, does Pacificor feel that this has been effective in identifying these repairs?
From the perspective of we're able to flag those and understand those are imminent threats more clearly and easily, yes.
Great. We have another question from Adam Barsh. How are the daily meteorological risk assessments determined? What goes into these? And also, any circling back on this works?
Yeah, so yes, so daily meteorology is through our weather research and forecasting model. And so we are getting that daily. And we are also, as described in the WMP, putting that into the fire risk and fire risk model, which is part of WFA from Technoselva. So that's giving us an idea of what our fire risk is daily at a first look, but we're also looking at other sources like from the Weather Service, from the NIFC to understand what our risk assessment is daily. And then we're using that to help assess what our fire risk looks like.
Great. We have another question from Zoe. Can you clarify if the rail rave risk assessment was completed for all Pacific Coast territory or just for non-HFTD in the HFRA? And then clarify why the HFRA risk scores can't be compared to risk scores in the HFTD.
Yeah. So we did all the risk scoring for all of our California service territory. Let me clarify in the HFTD is we don't have the risk scoring of how those areas were defined back when they were created by CAL FIRE. And that work that happened earlier. So those are the risk scores we don't have. We do have the risk scores for the circuits within our service within the HFTD that are ours, and you can see those on the slide where we show our weighted average top 5% highest risk circuits.
You
Does that
yeah,
help, Zoe? No.
And Zoe, let us know if you have any follow-up on that. We have another question from Henry. The composite consequence slide, so same slide 30, implied adding items with units that are not equal. For instance, the terrain difficulty index being added to fire station density and flame length. How are these being added together?
I'm checking with Chase because I'm not the person who can answer that question. I'm not the expert on that, but I'm checking with Chase to see if he can answer that question. Great.
We'll add that to our notes for follow-up, and perhaps it can be addressed during the open Q&A or at a later point. Great. Well, thank you so much for the questions and for your responses, Melissa. Oh, it looks like we do have one more from Zoe. PacifiCorp increases its line mile target from 80 to 120 line miles in 2025 and increases the cost from 62 million to 120 million, increasing the cost per line mile. So there are a few follow-up questions related to this. The first is the increased cost associated with the use of a contractor versus in-house workforce and resources?
That is the primary driver, as noted on the slide.
Okay. Great. And then the second question here, will PacifiCorp do any covered conductor work with in-house resources, or will all the work be allocated to the new contractor?
To follow up on that and double check with the team who's working with the contractor to make sure.
Okay, sounds good. And then the last couple questions here. What are the factors that inform covered conductor work location and prioritization? Are these selected purely based on wildfire risk scores or ease of access, and especially those increased miles for contractor work?
Yeah, so let me go to the section of the WMP where we discuss this. So risk scores are now one of the inputs to it, where before we didn't have that specific information. But we also look at other things. Let me get to the table here just to make sure I capture them all. Also looking at things such as the technical assessment. So constructability, accessibility, vegetation, the geotechnical and environmental and permitting as also considerations. And there's a little bit of nuance there where we want to and will prioritize by circuit, but how we execute may be different based off some of those constraints. So if it takes longer to permit, if it's a higher priority, we just need to start sooner and understand that it may happen from an execution perspective a little bit later, just because it's taking us longer to work through that.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you for the questions. I believe that's all the questions I'm seeing in the Q&A at the moment. Feel free to add additional questions or raise your hand.
And we'll capture these questions that we need to circle back on and see if we can have an answer by this afternoon.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa and Jessica. Yeah, as you said, we'll have this more last call for questions.
Zoe does have their hand up. I'm not sure if they have any follow-up questions, but we'll go ahead and see if there's any follow-up questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll just ask a follow-up question on this HFRA compared to HFTD. I'm curious as to using the new risk assessment, the RAIL and RAVE, how that HFRA really compares to historically classified HFTD tier 3 and tier 2. So are you seeing the HFRA with the new risk assessment compares very similarly to the tier 2,
Right.
tier 3, or are you seeing, kind of a hodgepodge in the HFRA relative to those zones?
Yeah. So if I think I understand your question, Zoe, it's like, hey, did we check our risk scores against what's already existing HFTD to go like, would these fall in these areas? Is that what I understand? Like, are we aligned?
And I'm not asking about the actual scoring of the
Right.
HFTD method. I'm
Okay.
asking about your new distribution of risk.
Mhm.
Is it aligning with tier 3 and tier 2 designations, including spreading into the HFRA, or are you seeing some of the highest risk in what was historically HFTD tier 2 or in the new HFRA?
I don't have that exact answer. So happy to capture that and see if we can get an answer for you by this afternoon. And if not, happy to do a follow-up also, just to make sure we all have the same answer.
Great, thank you so much.
And I am not seeing any more raised hands or questions at the moment.
All right. Yep, we're seeing none. Yep, thank you, Melissa. So now we'll take a 15-minute break and we'll come back at 10:15. So it's slightly a little bit more than 15-minute break. So yeah, and then we're gonna proceed with Horizon West. Thank you guys. just another before we move on, just another reminder that there'll be an open Q&A session at the end of the day. So if something comes to you, please feel free to ask that then. We can move on now, and I'll turn it over to Horizon West.
Thank you, Johan. Next slide, please. Again, my name is Lemuel Gardner. I'm representing Horizon West. Horizon West operates the Suncrest static VAR compensator located in the greater San Diego County area. The Suncrest facility supports voltage support and provides resiliency to the San Diego Gas and Electric's Suncrest facility. The facilities for Suncrest includes a static VAR compensator substation and an approximate 1 mile underground 230 kV transmission line. The Suncrest facility went online in February of 2021, and it has no history of utility instigated ignitions. Current staff is approximately 2 part-time operating engineers. Next slide, please. The facility is located just outside of Alpine, California. In the left image, you can see the Suncrest facility is located in the upper right-hand corner with the underground transmission line connecting the HWT Suncrest project to the San Diego Gas and Electric Suncrest substation. Next slide, please. Here we've got a view of the entirety of the Suncrest substation. It's hardscaped. Again, it has a 10-foot perimeter concrete wall. Next slide. Lastly, the Suncrest facility is wholly sited in a identified Tier 3 high fire threat district. Next slide. Given Suncrest's limited scope of operations and footprint, also having no distribution systems, retail load, or retail customers, HWT had limited applicable changes for its 2025 Wildfire Mitigation Plan update. In its 2023 to 2025 WMP cycle base plan, it noted that there were no planned improvements or changes for the 2023 to 2025 WMP cycle. I do identify, sorry, previous slide, please. Thank you. There was one change noted for a new initiative. HWT plans on participating in 2 wildfire mitigation industry groups in the 2025 calendar year. This was not an activity that was planned when the original base plan was submitted in 2023. As a result, it's a new expenditure and therefore above the 20% required threshold for the 2025 WMP update. So that has been noted here. Next slide, please. HWT was required to report on one progress area, specifically its QA/QC process. In response to Horizon West provided documentation related to the QA/QC process, including relevant procedures, checklists, and provided a description and analysis of the process relating to its asset management and asset inspections. Horizon West was also required to update on document sharing practices. However, this requirement was not required for reporting until the 2026 to 2028 WMP submission, which will occur next year. And with that, that closes out HWT's 2025 WMP planned updates. And I will open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Linnell. Seems like we have one question. Jessica, could you please help me with that?
Yes. Yes, we have a question from Kevin Miller regarding the change to 2025 expenditures. Does Horizon West have a calculation on how they arrived at this number to account for participation in industry groups? Original 2025 expenditures listed as 67,000 increased to 147,000 in Table 4.1 of its WMP under the summary of WMP expenditures table.
Certainly, thank you for the question. So the original 67 K total, that was related to the cost, internal O&M for asset inspections, vegetation program management, etc. The additional increase in between the 67 and the new number, that's the cost of participation in the industry group. So that includes fees for participation, etc.
Thank you, Linnell. There are any other questions? Feel free to add those to the Q&A or raise your hand.
I am not seeing any raised hands at the moment.
Looks like we got another question in the Q&A. Another one from Kevin Miller. Horizon West mentioned that as it gains more operational experience, it will evaluate changes to its asset management and inspections procedures, including QA, QC processes. Is there a timeline to incorporate results into the table related to grid design and maintenance Q&A program showing the following: activity being audited, sample size, type of audit, audit results, and yearly target pass rate?
Sure, thank you for the question. So as noted earlier, Horizon West has two operating engineers that perform all of the asset management inspections. They conduct one site inspection monthly, and so there's 12 inspections a year, and each of those inspections gets reviewed and assessed. So at current, HWT's position is that no additional QA/QC improvements are necessary or required given the limited scope of operations.
I did not see any other questions with raised hand, but I'll have a last call for questions.
Good afternoon. This is James from Ellis Power Grid, California. I believe we're good on our end to get started if we're ready to go.
at the moment, since Liberty has to wait until like 1:30, or I'm not sure if they're ready right after lunch, but I think at the moment it would be great to have a little bit longer lunch and then come back for the LS Power, if you don't mind, because there's some schedule conflict for the Liberty at the moment. So
Understood. And is the lunch break at noon? Oh, here it is. Okay, thank you.
yeah, sorry about that. So excuse me. Yeah, so since we're not seeing any more questions for Horizon West, thank you, Lino. If there's no more question, we can pause here for a lunch break, and then we will come back at the for the presentation with LS Power. Since we're ahead of the schedule, let's take a little bit longer break for lunch, and let's come back at 12:45. And yeah, I hope you have a great lunch break, and we'll come back after lunch. Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing the numbers not that much, so we can go ahead and get started again. Thank you for coming back, everyone. And up next, we have a presentation with LS Power. Take it away, James.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so I'm James Zerkowski with LS Power Grid California, and I'll be giving our 2025 update presentation. So just starting off with a basic agenda, we'll start with an asset overview, give you an idea of our various assets, and then jump into a risk assessment strategy, and then the various required changes to our metrics, some new programs, progress on continued areas for improvement, and then kind of sum it all up with some key takeaways before going into a Q&A session. All right. Yeah, so for the 2023 to 2025 WMP cycle, LS Power Grid California has 2 planned substations and no overhead lines, so neither distribution nor transmission. So our first facility over on the left is the Orchard substation. It's planned to be energized in Q1 of 2025. As you can kind of see on the map on the left here, it's located in the kind of southwestern portion of Fresno County. So it's a 500 kV StatCom facility, and it's located primarily in an agricultural area with, really low to non-existent fuel sources. Our second facility on the right is going to be our Fern Road substation that's planned to be energized in Q4 of 2025. So this facility will also be a 500 kV StatCom, and if you kind of look at the map on the right, it'll be located kind of the lower middle section of Shasta County, which is a higher tier threat. It's primarily a tier 2 high fire threat area dominated by hardwood forests and some woodland areas. So a little bit more risk there for us. Next slide. All right, so jumping into our risk assessment strategy. So our risk assessment methodology has not changed since our initial model in 2023. When we drafted it, we were in construction, and we are still currently in the construction phase of both projects. So with that being the case and local conditions remaining fairly stable, we decided just to keep our same methodology. So as we only have the 2 static facilities and no overhead lines, we defined our overall utility risk by spatial landscape categorization risk assessment, which takes a lot of various inputs that I'll get into a little more, and outputs an overall low, moderate, high, extreme risk for wildfire. So we worked with a consultant in the industry to perform this wildfire quantitative risk assessment using various industry standard modeling platforms, national data sources, and kind of the best available information on wildfires that we were able to gather. So this risk assessment models the probability of a wildfire, the expected fire behavior, the scale of the probable wildfire, the hazards of utility-caused wildfire, and then it generates that overall risk categorization that I mentioned. So you can kind of see at the top, those are the various risk models, and then the key input sources from those different national data sources and modeling platforms that we used. And then it all kind of comes out and creates this general risk categorization that we used. And so it categorized Fern Road as an extreme risk category, and then Orchard was an overall low risk category. Next slide, thank you. So jumping into our reportable changes to targets and objectives, these were primarily driven by permitting and construction delays. So previously, we expected the energization dates for both sites to be in 2024, as kind of shown here in the slide, Q2 for Orchard and Q4 for Fern Road. But as I mentioned, they've now been both delayed to 2025. So with Orchard being in Q1 of 2025 and Fern Road in Q4. So the shift in energization obviously caused some operational dependent tasks to need new targets now as the energization dates have shifted out. So these tasks are primarily our substation inspection targets, our vegetation inspection targets shifted out until we're operational, and then installation of cameras have been pushed back due to construction delays. And then also the integration of a weather forecasting tool into operational decisions, as we are not yet operational. So all these tasks will be implemented eventually, just shifting to align better with our new energization dates. And I did briefly want to mention our expenditure changes did not meet the reportable threshold, so I will not be covering those today. As for new programs, one we identified since our initial draft of the wildfire mitigation plan is to add dedicated weather stations on site at all of our different substations. So we believe that these will enhance situational awareness of O&M personnel, giving them a better idea of what's going on in the area, what are the temperatures, and then all this data can be sent real time to our systems operations control center, where they can view all this information too. So they'll have the live weather feed data, and then they'll also have our real-time, 24/7 camera surveillance of the actual sites, so they can view the conditions for themselves and have this supplemental weather information. So we're still actually drafting the operational procedure plans for this, but we're hoping to have those plans done by closer to the end of the year in October. So progress on areas for continued improvement. So as for this, at the time of drafting our first draft in 2023, we're pretty far out from the energization time. So our operational plans were still kind of being worked out and under development. So we've come a long way since then as we close in on those energization dates, and have improved some of our emergency preparedness plans. So throughout Section 8 of our wildfire mitigation plan, we filled in various voids with new information and are trying to fill in some of those gaps. So one of the things we filled in some more information on was key gaps and limitations in various different situations, such as integrating our PSP specific responses into our plan, different communication plans, and then coordination with public and local agencies. So we also refined details of our training program, including various staff qualifications, responsibilities, what sort of training they'll undergo and drills that they'll be conducting. So we've also further defined our key stakeholders and emergency communication protocols with them now that we're more integrated into the local dispatch systems and groups. So in summary, there have been lots of updates, a lot on our staff qualifications, and then on our operational protocols and communication plans. So just kind of to summarize all of those, some of our key takeaways, we're still in the construction phase, but we're making great strides to become operational in 2025. So we will most definitely have one substation energized during this current WMP cycle with the hopes of having our second one fall into this cycle as well in Q4 of 2025. So with these two stations, again, we have no overhead lines. We serve no customers, no real service territory there, just the two isolated facilities. But as we mature and grow in California space, we hope to expand that a little bit more, and we'll continue to coordinate with our various key stakeholders and expand our influence in local areas. And as we refine our operational and maintenance plans, we'll include more information on normal and emergency conditions so that all processes are covered. And all this will be reflected in our future iterations of our wildfire mitigation plan. And that is all I had for today. If there are any questions.
It's like we received a question in the Q&A chat from Kevin Miller. Question is, has the current proximity and progression direction of the park fire caused LS Power to consider any of its emergency response or facility planning strategies?
Hey, James, you want to take that one, or you want me to?
Yeah, if you're prepared, that'd be great if you could take that one, Heath.
Yeah, hi, I'm Heath Holt, LS Power, Health, Safety, and Environmental. So I wouldn't say it has changed a bit of construction. We're currently off-site right now. Our site is not included in any evacuation orders or warnings at this point, but we are 17.4 miles from the northern head of the fire. So we've kind of walked through the relationships that we've made on the ground with CAL FIRE Station 93 there in Whitmore. We've had those relationships built because of this process of building our wildfire mitigation plan. And so we've been in contact with them daily to kind of let them know where we're at, make sure we had all contractors off-site. We prepared our site. Thankfully, we're in construction mode, and so we've been following our fuel mitigation for the perimeter of the site. And so we were prepared for a burnover if it were to happen with our equipment positioned into the middle of the construction site. But right now, 17.4 miles away from us, air quality has been a bit of an issue, so we're monitoring that closely. And fortunately, over the last 48 hours, the northward progression of the fire has kind of diminished, and now it's starting to push a little bit easterly off that northeastern head of the fire. So, Dave, I'm not sure if that answered your question. if you have additional question for that, but that's kind of an update of where our Fern asset is related to the park fire.
Great, thank you so much for that. It looks like that answered the question, so appreciate it.
All right, any further questions?
We're not seeing any other raise hand or any other questions in the chat box, but I'll have a one last call for the questions. All right, I'm saying none. Thank you very much, James. So now I think we can move on. Is Peter from Liberty, are you ready to present, or do you need a few more minutes or any other time?
I'm ready if you can hear me.
Right. Yeah, we can hear you. All right, now I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so my name is Peter Stoltman. I'm the Senior Manager of Wildfire Prevention for Liberty, and I'll be providing a review of our 2025 WMP update today. So next slide, please. Just a quick overview of Liberty. We have approximately 49,000 customers, primarily in the Lake Tahoe Basin. That includes 1,400 miles of overhead lines, approximately 300 miles of underground line, and 23,000 utility poles, and 12 substations that we operate out of. One thing that's unique to Liberty is that we are connected to the Nevada Balancing Authority as opposed to the California Independent System Operator. And so we receive our power through a power purchase agreement with NV Energy. And we have approximately 125 employees maintaining our system. So next slide. The main components of our wildfire mitigation plan include vegetation management, infrastructure hardening, situational awareness, and our public safety power shutoff program and other emergency response efforts. So next slide. One major change in this WMP update is that we've been working on developing a new risk model. So previously we had been working with Chris Lautenberger and REX Engineering, as well as Arup for our wildfire risk model, as well as our PSPS risk modeling. And in the last year, we've been working with Techno Silva, as well as a company called Direction, to develop a new risk model that's more aligned with the technical guidelines provided by Energy Safety. And so the main components of the risk model, and the next couple slides will get into it a little bit more as well, but I'm really focusing on taking the wildfire risk provided by Techno Silva as an input into an asset investment model provided by Direction, where we can upload current asset health data. So currently the model includes data for poles, overhead conductors, vegetation, and fuses. And then we have the ability to include additional modules on assets as we continue to develop the model. So the key outputs that we've been able to develop in this last year have been, an asset failure risk based on the asset health data that we've provide through the direction mile, the wildfire risk as an input from Techno Silva, and then financial data for calculating risk spend efficiency so that we can have really more of a risk-based decision-making platform for our project planning and prioritization. The other thing is, with this new risk model, we're able to look at risk at a much more granular level, so we can get from the wildfire risk data at the system, circuit, segment, span level, and when we feed that into the direction risk assessment tool, we can drill down to the specific asset. So it can be an individual pole, a span of overhead conductor, vegetation zones along the system, whereas before our risk was provided in polygons, right, that would kind of cover large sections of a circuit or entire circuits or multiple circuits within that risk polygon. So being able to really drill down into the that more granular level is going to be really helpful to us to determine not only where risk is within the system, to drill down into the circuit level, and then within that circuit see what assets specifically on that circuit may be driving risk, so that we can prioritize work. The next kind of part, moving from the composite risk from the wildfire risk and combining the asset failure risk, the next phase will be starting to incorporate PSPS risk. We haven't currently gotten to that point yet. We've really been focusing on this first portion of the risk model, and then PSPS risk will be part of the future enhancement to the risk model. Next slide, please. So this slide kind of gives an overview of the wildfire risk that's provided by Techno Silva. So it's a combination of the climatological risk developed from historical weather data, as well as asset data from our system, outage data from our outage management system, and then Techno Silva will then simulate fires along the system to provide that wildfire risk output. The other thing that we're doing is including operational risk, so including data from our weather stations that's coming in at real time, as well as fuel moisture sampling. We do our own fuel moisture sampling throughout our system that can be fed into the model, and that's joined with the climatological analysis that we can look at for situational awareness, day to day as weather conditions change, so that we can make decisions based on either relay settings for the system, potential PSPS, where we might look at that, and then also operational decisions for staging crew, resources, and just general day-to-day risk management for wildfire risk on the system. Additionally, we've broken the system into 48 fire potential index zones or de-energization zones, so we can look, again, if we're going to make any operational or engineering decisions on the system based on current conditions, as well as project planning and prioritization, we can break it down into those kind of smaller fire potential index zones that was created in our previous work with REACS Engineering. Next slide. This slide provides kind of an overview of the framework of the direction risk assessment tool. And so we've taken, like I'd mentioned, the outputs from the Techno Silva wildfire risk models and provide that as an input into the direction model. We're combining that with asset health data, as I had mentioned, poles, fuses, overhead conductors, vegetation data, inspection records, maintenance, repair records. All of that is able to be uploaded into the model, and then we can run various scenarios for different projects on the system to determine how we can reduce risk. And it's would provide a unitized risk calculation. So what it provides us is the ability to determine, how much risk will be reduced per dollar spent from the projects that we have planned or proposed for our system. Next slide. So updates to our targets and expenditures. Liberty, we plan to spend $45 million in 2025. That includes approximately $30.5 million in planned capital projects and grid hardening initiatives, and approximately $12 million in O&M spend on vegetation management activities. And one thing that we've really been focusing on the last couple of years is implementing our sensitive relay profile program. And so we have current plan to have 15 circuits with SRP installed in 2024 and 7 additional circuits in 2025, which will be 22 circuits total at the end of the WMP plan. And additionally, the other initiatives that we've been focusing on, we continue to do, is such as covered conductor, pole replacements, fuse replacements, open wire, gray wire, secondary line replacements, tree attachment removals, and our routine planned vegetation management activities that we've been doing for several years now. Next slide. So, sorry, this is a repeat, so you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we did update our quarterly asset inspection targets for 2025, as you can review there. Again, this is planned asset inspections for detailed inspections, intrusive pole inspections, patrol inspections, other discretionary inspections. That would include things like storm response inspections using drones. We're also been piloting infrared on transmission last year. So it'd be various discretionary inspections that would be conducted throughout the system. Quality assurance and quality control, 12% of inspections for that, and then our substation inspections as well. So those are asset inspection targets. And the next slide, please. It's our vegetation management inspection targets. These haven't really changed much from year to year. For our detailed inspection program, we're targeting about a third of the system per year, so that 220 miles. It varies from year to year based on what specific circuits are being inspected, but that represents about a third of the system. LiDAR, we're continuing to do our full system survey of LiDAR inspections to measure vegetation to conductor clearances. And then our quality assurance and quality control program will continue and also ends up being about a third of the system, but that's a function of how much work and inspections we're doing that year, and as a calculation to make sure that we're having our statistically valid sample of QC miles for that program. Next slide, please. So a new program that is outlined in the WMP update is a quality assurance component to our vegetation management program. So we've been doing quality control for a few years now. That's really focused on post-work or post-inspection checks on work that's completed. And we wanted to implement a quality assurance program as a pre-fire season check to see how well our inspections and maintenance programs are doing to maintain compliance and conformance with our vegetation management program standards. So we implemented that for the first time last year, and we're really happy with the results. Finding, as you can see, 99% compliance throughout the system to, again, really happy with the results and being able to do that as a pre-fire season check of the system just to make sure that our program, is meeting the goals that are designed from a vegetation management strategy. Next slide. For areas of improvement, we have kind of a few categories here. One was to look at the sensitive relay profile program. As I mentioned, that's being implemented on 22 circuits throughout the next 2 years as an expedited mitigation strategy to provide additional risk reduction across our service territory while continuing to implement our grid hardening and covered conductor projects. At a high level, looking at kind of the factors considered for all of our wildfire mitigation initiatives, looking at cost, time to implement, resource needs, and effectiveness. We determined that sensitive relay profile is a very good option for us to maintain or to get a high level of risk reduction in a short amount of time while we continue to plan and permit some of the more resource intensive projects like covered conductor and traditional overhead hardening. Next slide. We did address a few questions regarding our asset inspection program. Covered conductor inspections was something that has come up, and what we've done is updated our detailed inspection checklist for operations to look specifically for known failure modes of covered conductor. And these were items provided by the manufacturer for operations to look at specifically when performing detailed inspections. So that would cover conductor would be included in that. We also updated our QA/QC program target pass rate from 85% to 90% for 2025. Next slide. A couple updates for our situational awareness programs. One is our weather station program. So over the past several years, Liberty has installed 39 weather stations throughout our system. Those stations were all recommended locations provided by previous analysis that was done for our system. Now that all of those stations have been installed, we've implemented a maintenance and calibration program. So that started this year. Contractors wrapping that up in the next couple weeks for 2024, so that we can make sure that all of our stations are up to date with firmware. Any components that need to be replaced are replaced. They're sending data to our web server so that all that data goes into our weather forecast models and operating as designed. So the other update is on Wildfire HD cameras. So there are several cameras throughout the Tahoe Basin and Liberty Service Territory that are were alert wildfire, and that University of Nevada, Reno has combined that into the Alert West network of wildfire cameras. So there is an existing network of cameras throughout the system that we have access to through Alert West, and we're working on an agreement with University of Nevada, Reno to essentially sponsor the cost for maintaining cameras that are covering our service territory, as well as installing new cameras where current coverage is lacking in the system. So UNR recently completed a viewshed analysis of that and has provided us a proposal of some locations that would be beneficial to add to the program. So we're working on executing that agreement before the end of this WMP cycle. Next slide. Other grid hardening areas of improvement, we're continuing to replace traditional fuses with non-expulsion fuses in 2024 and 2025. We've also been looking at exempt lightning arresters. We don't currently have a standard for exempt lightning arresters on our system. We've received a few samples from manufacturers, and our engineering standards department is looking at those to develop a standard that we can use to pilot those exempt lightning arresters on our system, hoping for implementation in 2025. Additionally, as part of our sensitive relay profile scheme and other studies that we've had conducted by University of Nevada, Reno for fire mitigation, there was a report that they completed that recommended to really focus on our sensitive relay profile program and no longer pursue the high impedance fault detection. That was kind of another item that we had been considering in the past. Next slide, please. Okay, and that provides our update. I'll be happy to take any questions at this time. I see one question here. Are sustained wind gusts accounted for as inputs in the wildfire spread model?
Yeah, it looks like that question comes from Constantine. Yeah, are sustained wind gusts accounted for as inputs in the wildfire spread model described in the 2025 update? It looks like in your 2025 update that Liberty broadly states that gusts are not considered in this model.
So I know in the wildfire spread model that it's historical data that's used to factor into that, but also I don't know, Kyle, if you're on and if you have any more details on that.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to that. So as a part of the wildfire spread model, gust duration is very unpredictable and it has different effects on fire activity essentially. And there's other factors that kind of flow into fire behavior, like slope, and in general, fire behavior is not symmetrical in accordance to wind and slope. So that's kind of the reasoning behind not considering gusts in the model.
Great, thank you for that. Hopefully that answers your question, Constantine. We have another question from Kevin Miller asking, how is Liberty differentiating between or migrating from activities completed by contractor staff and internal staff with regard to its risk modeling, including understanding of model outputs and how they are used to determine the most effective mitigation selection?
Kyle, can you take that one as well?
Yeah, definitely. So essentially, the roles that our contractors play in the risk modeling activities really are in the model development phases and enhancement phases of kind of our risk model, where internally we're taking on the role of understanding the model outputs and using that for our risk-based decision making. I think that I should answer that one.
Thank you, Kyle. We have another question. This one's from Zoe Harold, related to Liberty's increased cost for its fire resilient right-of-way initiative. Can you explain the current and planned scope of work for this initiative and the driver of the increased cost?
Sure. Yeah. So the cost for this fire resilient right-of-way initiative is part of a project that we have in partnership with the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit of the Forest Service and National Forest Foundation to treat the cross-country lines that we have on the national forest throughout the Tahoe Basin. And so those costs are largely our portion that's contributing to the implementation of that project. And so as those projects get planned by the Forest Service and administered by the National Forest Foundation, we then will essentially provide, cost contributions. And so the costs that are shown in there are estimates for the next 2 years of implementing that work, or in 2025, the work planned to implement that work. The scope would include essentially treating the forest land as a 300-foot wide corridor or 150 feet on either side of our conductors throughout the national forest. I don't know if that answers the question, or if there's a follow-up, I can try my best.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, Zoe, let us know if you have any follow-up. If not, there's a couple more questions from Constantine Lavore. The first one, Liberty reports that it intends to work on developing PSPS risk models after wildfire risk and asset failure risk modules have been put into production. In the meantime, how is Liberty currently weighing whether risk of calling a PSPS event outweighs risk of wildfire? For example, weather conditions, fire potential index, and impacts to customers.
Right. So we do have a detailed PSPS playbook, and the determining factors of calling a PSPS event are developed by Liberty, and those include weather forecasts, weather models, fire potential index. We have a composite risk index score that's developed by our fire risk consultant. So whether we call a PSPS event or not is really a factor of the current conditions that would be happening on our system. And we do have all the tools in place to be able to assess those current conditions and determine if thresholds are met and conditions are right for us to call a PSPS event. What we don't have is calculating those kind of for planning purposes, right? Long-term project forecast modeling of PSPS versus wildfire risk trade-off and things of that. So I hope that answers the question. And I hope we don't give the impression that we don't have the appropriate data and information and tools to determine whether or not to call a PSPS event. It's more a factor of the ability to calculate any risk reduction of calling a PSPS event from our other WMP initiatives.
Thank you, Peter.
And I see the next question. I'll turn it over to Kyle to answer that one.
Sorry, just to jump in, before we go to the next question, I apologize. I believe Zoe has her hand raised, perhaps follow up on the previous question from Zoe. Go ahead, Zoe.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I thank you for that response about the fire resilient right-of-way project. Can you just clarify, so is that a cost sharing with the National Forest and other agencies in the region?
Yes.
And then it's a fuel treatment or fuel reduction project? Are you also doing any I guess kind of like long-term investments that would shift the fuels away from high fire risk? Or is it mostly just clearing out existing fuels?
No, so it's a combination of reducing existing fuel load as well as forest health. So there's a component of timber harvesting to decrease the basal area factor of the forest adjacent to the power line corridors.
Perfect, thanks. And then is part of that, like the timber removal also going to affect strike trees and other risks like that?
Yes. Yeah. So essentially there's like 3 zones, and the current scope of the project that's in the WMP are zones 1 and 2. Zone 1 is the 30 feet directly under our wires, and so that's, you know, really eliminating almost all vegetation, masticating under those lines, leaving some brush cover where appropriate. And then zone 2 is at 150 feet on either side of the line. So they're looking at strike trees, diseased, dying, defective trees, and targeting those for removal first. Once those are all marked for removal, then they'll calculate the basal area factor and see if it's achieved by removing those hazard trees or potential danger trees. If they need to then take additional trees after that, then it goes by kind of species preference. So we see a lot of tree mortality in white firs. So if all the, say, diseased, defective trees, removing those don't get to the target basal area factor, then we would target things like white firs where we would expect higher mortality, and then leaving Jeffrey pines or cedars that would expected to improve forest health.
Great, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yep, you're welcome.
Great, thank you both. So we do have another question from Constantine. Were there any notable surprises in how the ranking of the top 20 riskiest circuits changed when switching to the new risk framework?
Hi, yeah. In terms of the 20 kind of ranked risk circuits, there wasn't anything necessarily surprising, although you probably did notice between our 2023 WMP and the updated filing that that ranking did change, and we kind of expected that based off of primarily previously the ranking was based off of purely, or I shouldn't say purely, but mainly and majorly fire risk, where now we're mixing in the asset failure risk and our asset health scores to formulate that composite risk score. So there weren't really many surprises there. And if there's a follow-up or anything, I can hopefully help answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. I'm not seeing any others in the Q&A at the moment, but feel free to add additional questions if anyone has follow-up. Oh, looks like we just got one from Zoe. Let's see, grid monitoring system deployments targets were decreased from 10 to 7 grid monitoring system deployment, but doubled in cost. The update reports that this was based on additional experience. Can you explain the driver of the cost increase, for example, equipment or time to implement?
Yeah, I don't know if our engineering manager is on, who'd be best to speak to that. If not, I don't know, Jordan, if you have any input on that. Otherwise, I could take a stab at it.
Maybe we can follow up on that question.
Oh, I think
I don't.
Andrew is here.
If needed, we can potentially follow up on this question either during the open Q&A or after the workshop. We can note this as one for follow-up if needed.
Okay, yeah, I'm just messaging our engineering manager now so that he can review the question and provide an answer. And yeah, we can answer this during the open Q&A.
Great. All right. I'll just have one last call for the questions if there's any other additional questions.
Looks like we do have another question from Zoe in the chat. Liberty's update states to eliminate the current backlog of 604 work orders, Liberty will need to increase the number of closed work orders to 1,456, which is a 6% increase over 3-year average for the next 2 years. Is Liberty planning to increase its annual work order resolution rate? It plans 444 work orders closed for 2024 and 2025.
Yes, the plan is to increase work order closing rate over our 3-year average to eliminate the backlog. And we believe that we can do that with our current workforce without having to bring on additional resources. A lot of those work orders are I guess relatively minor repairs as opposed to what we've been needing to do from a repair standpoint. So yeah, we feel confident that we'll be able to eliminate that backlog. By 2025, yes, to eliminate the backlog by 2025.
All right, thank you, Zoe. Let's see if there's any other question from any other people. I'm seeing none. Thank you very much, Peter. All right, now all the presentations are done, and we'll take a 15-minute break here, and then we'll come back for the open Q&A session. At that point, we will go topic by topic, and that's a chance to ask questions to any electrical corporations. If there's any question that you didn't ask or couldn't ask earlier, you could use that time to ask that then. So, all right, so let's take a break now, and why don't we come back and at 1:55, and then we'll start the open Q&A session then. Thank you. Yeah. Now we can pick this back up and start with the open Q&A session. Again, during this time, we'll go topic by topic, and this is a good chance to ask questions for all the electrical corporations, just a few or just for one. And now we can start with the first topic, and that is risk methodology and assessments. And I'll pause here, and anyone that has any questions on this topic can raise your hand or type into the chat.
Hi, yes, Zoe Harold with Green Power Institute. My question is for Liberty about the risk modeling. So right now, you're modeling the asset types, poles, conductors, fuses, and vegetation management. About what % of your risk or the risk drivers do those asset types cover? And you mentioned a plan to essentially expand the types of assets that you are modeling risk for. What is next on the list for expanding that modeling?
Yeah, I think I can take this one. So to answer your first part of the question, at the moment, we are targeting to kind of productionalize our risk modeling for the end of this quarter. And so currently we don't have some of those outputs to, what % of risk is a part of, maybe poles versus conductor, et cetera. So currently, we're not able to answer those questions, but we're looking forward to being able to answer those questions very soon.
Great, thanks.
And then I think your second part of your question was to which asset types would we be looking into implementing next?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, so we're kind of more or less targeting areas where risk is in question for things like SRP. That's the main one that comes to mind at the moment. I have a list of them that I don't have pulled up at the moment. But we're mainly targeting things that are kind of like in topics of conversation regarding risk. And then we'll be implementing additional things on going through. I just don't have the list pulled up at the moment. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So for like the SRP, do you mean you're looking at like risk mitigation, like model-based risk mitigation of SRP?
Yeah, kind of comparing how much risk we might be able to reduce or mitigate by implementing SRP on a circuit or a certain segment of a circuit and things like that.
I see. So it's not, so the asset types that are getting looked at next is more so how much risk is being reduced, not like adding in, transformers or something like that into the risk-based model. Okay.
Sorry, transformers is also on that list. It just didn't come to mind at the very beginning there. Transformers is another one of those where if we based off of asset health, where can we prioritize replacing transformers like similarly to fuses or conductor and changing conductor types in part of that analysis and things like that.
Great, thank you so much.
No problem.
Right, let's see if there's any other question on this topic.
See, I believe Zoe has her hand raised. I don't know if your hand was still up or if you had another question.
Yeah, I'd like to ask another question of PacifiCorp. I know I had asked one earlier, and I believe the speaker said she would check on it. I'm looking back in the Q&A list. But it was essentially around what the risk model output was for HFRA versus HFTD tier 3 and tier 2, and kind of what they're seeing. Is there a different distribution of risk across their territory than what was currently mapped in the HFTD map?
Right. Yeah, thank you, Zoe. We were trying to dig into the question and get all our answers before this meeting, before the afternoon, and yours was the one we couldn't get to. So we need to do a little bit more digging to make sure we get you the right answer about the distribution and how the risk scores in the HFRA and the HFTDs are lining up. So happy to make sure we get that back to you, though, because we know this important question. We want to make sure we answer it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And maybe I'll just ask a quick follow-up that might be easy. So you have your top 5 risk circuit segments. How many of those were in the HFRA? We don't have the different zone designations for those.
No, because that is straight out of the WMP. So
Sure.
3 of them were in tier 3. 8 were in tier 2, and the rest were in the HFRA. And those are all circuits and not
Okay.
segments.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Thank you, Zoe. And let's see, I'll just have a last call for this. Any other question on this risk related topic?
We did have an answer for Henry on his risk question on our risk model. If that's okay to answer now.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, so I think Henry's question was on the composite risk. How are we adding in units that are equal, like terrain difficulty and fire station density and flame length? So in talking with the risk team, those are being converted into unitless inputs on a scale of 0 to 1 before we start adding them together.
All right. I'm not seeing any more hands. Okay. Okay, now we can move on to the next topic then. That is grid design, operations, and maintenance. Anyone that has any questions on this topic, please raise your hand or
Sorry
type
to
into the
interrupt, but there looks like there was a question from Tyler in the question Q&A chat.
Yes, it looks like this question does pertain to grid, so we can go ahead and ask this now. So this is a question for Transbay Cable. Do you have any experience with HVDC breakers? And if so, would you be open to working with the large utilities to share this experience?
Neil for Transbay Cable. I would need to take that question back to our operations team, but if the person asking the question can follow up with me directly, I will make sure that they get an answer.
Great, thank you, Lineal. I will mark that one for follow-up.
Thank you.
All right, and it looks like we have a question from Zoe Harold. This one's for Liberty. Liberty's expulsion fuse replacement rates were slowed due to the replacement fuses experiencing the high rate of failures. 2024 and 2025 targets were updated to 500 replacements, though replacement targets were previously much higher. They were at 3,800 fuses in 2023. Liberty, can you provide an update on the new expulsion fuse replacements and clarify why the replacement rate has decreased substantially from 2023? And then also how many expulsion fuses still need to be replaced and what is the timeline for completion?
Hi, I think I can give a pretty good answer for this. So, 23, just to go in chronological order. So in 2020, well, previously to 2023, the fault tamer fuses were installed in our system, and there's essentially a large issue with those. Hence, we were moving to the expulsion limited fuse. And so starting in 2023, we kind of did as many fuses as we could. So that's why that target of 3,800 was there for 2023, which I believe we did closer to 4,200, if I am not mistaken with my numbers. And I believe in all, we have just under 6,000 fuses in our whole system. So that's kind of why our targets have shrunk, so we can also prioritize other types of work regarding mitigation activities.
Yeah, and also just to clarify that the fuses, we're looking at mainline fuses where transformers are, so the number does not include fuses from lateral taps, just to provide that a little additional information. I also have an answer to the previous question regarding grid monitoring systems, which I believe may be appropriate here for this topic. I see there's a follow-up question from Zoe, though, first on the fuse replacements. Kyle, do you have an answer to that?
I believe, Zoe, I think I would like a clarification on your question. Is this in regards to the remainder of those expulsion fuses in the system?
Yeah, correct. So you mentioned that you throttled up in 2023 and exceeded the target, and then therefore reduced the target in 24 and 25. And then I think you said there were about 6,000 expulsion fuses. Does that mean you're like basically you've replaced about 5,000 at the end of 2025 and there's still more to do? I'm just trying to understand the full arc of the initiative.
No, I think you're pretty close. And 6,000 is somewhat of a shot in the dark. That number could be closer to 5,000 or it could be closer to 6,000. I don't have the information in front of me, but I think like with the targets, we should be very, very close to the amount of fuses in the system being replaced. To my knowledge, the throttling in 2023 was to get rid of the fault tamer fuses that were kind of known to have an issue. And so that's where the 3,800 comes from, and that target, which I believe we exceeded. And so I believe our focus is now on additional types of expulsionary fuses in the system.
I see. So that like the 2023 was replacing the faulty replacement fuses.
Yeah.
And okay, perfect. Thanks so much.
No, yeah, not a problem.
If now is a good time to answer the question regarding grid monitoring system deployment, I can cover that now, like I said, if appropriate.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Go ahead, Peter.
Oh, okay. So the one part is the decrease from 10 to 7 in 2025. That is because we're installing more than we initially targeted in 2024. So some of those, the 10 that were initially targeted in 2025 are actually going to be installed in 2024. So that's the reason for the decrease that was initially planned. And then with regard to the cost, those costs vary based on the length of line and number of fault indicators that need to be installed. And so for that year, there's a large project with some circuits that are much longer and also in high risk lines. So there's more fault indicators that need to be installed. So it's kind of a factor of both more equipment and more time to install based on the length of the circuit where those systems are being deployed.
All right. Any other questions on grid design, operations, and maintenance?
If it's appropriate, Pacific Power has the answers on the questions on some of the construction and that were asked earlier.
Sorry, was the question about the grid design?
Yeah, I think there were sort of three questions around grid design, around construction, and then asset remediation. And the first question was, how do we define feasible when ordering materials? And the answer from the team is we do order materials in advance when the design is sufficiently advanced to specify the correct materials. We have about half of the projected 2025 scope at the milestones so that we have long lead time materials placed on order. And we don't currently have any material constraints related to California projects for 2024 delivery. All those materials are either on hand or scheduled for delivery in time to support construction. The next question was, will Pacific Power do any covered conductor work with in-house resources, or will all the work be allocated to the new contractor? All the work on covered conductor will be completed or done by contract resources this year in California. And then the third question was about what may cause delays in remediation of code conditions if it's not materials. And it's really down to permitting and access. So whether U.S. Forest Service permits, private owner restrictions. As I said earlier, we do start permitting as early as possible, but particularly when it comes to agencies, we're on their timeline. So I think those were all the questions we had in this section. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Would there be any follow-up questions on those? Or any unanswered question on this topic from Pacific Corp or any other electrical corporations? I'll keep this longer in case there's any last minute question on this topic. All right, I think we're good then. Okay, we can move on to the next topic, that is vegetation management. Please raise your hands or type in chat if there's any question on this topic. I'll have a last call for questions on vegetation management. All right, I think we can move on. The next topic, situational awareness. Please raise your hand or type in the chat if there's any question on this topic.
All right, it looks like Zoe has her hand raised for a question for Pacificor. Go ahead, Zoe.
Yeah, thanks so much. So for Pacific Corp, you had a program that was the smoke detection and air quality sensor that was deployed in conjunction with a federal program, I believe. And so the reasoning that was provided for withdrawing or closing that program was that the technology wasn't ready. Can you explain a bit more about that and what's happening with the federal program and the limitations that have occurred?
So I'm not involved with the program, so I'll have to go ask our subject matter expert for some details on what's going on with the federal program.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, let's see if there's any other question on this topic. I'll have a last call for questions on situational awareness. All right, I think we can move on. Next topic, emergency preparedness and community outreach. All right, I think we can move on to the next topic, which is the last topic of the slides. Yep, public safety power shutoff, known as PSPS. I have a last call for questions on this topic before we move on. All right, I think we can move on to the next. Yeah, before we wrap up, would there be any other questions not related to specific topic, but anything in general? please raise your hand or type in the chat. Zoe, if you don't mind, for your last question, I know Pacific Core might need a follow-up on that, but could you please kind of type your last question so that we can just note it and follow up? Besides that, I'll have a last call. Were there any questions that you asked but did not get any answered, or any more follow-ups, or any electrical corporations have answers for those questions that need follow-ups? Please use this time for that time.
You, Zoe, for adding that to the chat. We'll make note of that so that we can get follow-up for you after the workshop.
Thank you, Zoe. And I'm not seeing any other hands or questions, so I think we can move on to the last slide for today.
We do have a raised hand that I
Oh,
see.
my apologies. Let's see. Yep, Karina.
Looks like the hand may have been raised on mistake as it was put back down.
Yeah, seems like a false alarm. Right. Just in case, would there be any other questions or any hands? All right, I think we can move on to the last slide. All right, I want to give thanks to all of the participants we heard from today, and thank you to all of the members of the public and stakeholders who called in and contributed to the panels. We appreciate everyone's time, attention, and good ideas here. Just as a reminder again, Written opening comments on Group 2 electrical corporations are due August 12th, so please keep that in mind. In this Group 2 workshop slides, we also have links to 2023-2025-WMP's docket and to data request responses received by the electrical corporations. And with that, I'll conclude today's meeting. And thank you very much again to everybody for taking the time out of your busy week to join us. And we very much appreciate your participation and engagement. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.